Rob is amazing. Rob is really considered a national expert that helps 2- and 4-year colleges create structures and processes to increase student completion. He works with, right now, more than 150 colleges, and I have to read the list because it's so long, but I'll read it fast, with the American Association of Community Colleges nationally, Pathways Institute, Lumina's Beyond Financial Aid, the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence, Gates Completion by Design, Lumina's Guided Pathways for Success, Kresge and Gates Pathways projects in Arkansas, Michigan, and Seattle area colleges, Texas Completes, and the Carnegie Foundation's That Way, Quant Way, woo! He also wears some rockin' Hawaiian shirts. All kidding aside, he makes this fun, he makes this relevant, and is truly an expert around the nation. And I'm so happy that on a holiday weekend, before the 4th of July, he is celebrating with all of us today to talk a little bit about Guided Pathways. Rob.
All right, thank you. Thank you. No pressure at all there. That was good. Yeah, no demand characteristic there. Yeah, so it is really fun to be here. It's good to be. I've done a lot of work around this country in the last decade of community colleges. My background is actually as a provost and a dean from the California Community College System, where I knew Ann when I was the league rep for Foothill Community College in California. I was a strategic consultant in industry before that, after I got my doctorate in social psychology from the University of Oregon. But I've spent much of the last decade working with colleges around the country and with systems and on these great projects. My good friends at CCRC, with Ryan and the folks at Achieving the Dream, with Jobs for the Future. A lot of what I see as my value is I get to travel this fine country and work with so many colleges. I have to update that bio because I counted recently and I'm at like 350 colleges that I've been in touch with on work like this throughout the last 10 years. And there's so much great stuff going on around the country that that I get to share with folks. I was on the road, I did 250,000 miles last year of travel, all within the US. Was on the road, I think 190 days in 93 cities. So I do have a lot of frequent flyer miles. That is one advantage of that. But it's because I love doing this work. And it's funny to hear Tom Bailey called the godfather of Guided Pathways, because I usually refer to Davis as the grandfather of Guided Pathways because he's older than me. And then I'm the weird uncle. But now I have to work in the godfather, grandfather, weird uncle thing. But what we're going to do over the next hour and a half, and I know that it is, by the way, a Friday afternoon before the holidays, and I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that if I was to magically finish between 2:40 and 2:45 with you, I would not get a lot of objections in this room. So just, if you want to object, know that your peers are going to look at you the way I used to do when we get to that point where the presenter goes, anyone have any more questions? And then the rest of the people in the room saying, anyone who gets asked a question right now, I am going to stare at like there's no tomorrow. I'm like already counting my car keys. It's all good. So what we're going to do over the next hour and a half, this is going to be a conversation. I'm going to go through some intro stuff. We're going to explore this together. We're going to tell the story of a four-year school, actually, Georgia State University, who has, I think, provided the most transformational story of improvement in higher education in the 21st century. And I know that's a big claim. But when you see what they've done, I think maybe you can throw another one out there for consideration, but I think at scale is maybe the largest transformation in higher education in the 21st century. It paves the way for Guided Pathways reform that we'll talk about in the third section. Secondly, we're going to talk a little bit about economic mobility and equity and the key role that community colleges play, maybe even more so than we had imagined in the higher education spectrum for students who come from the lower income spectra. As I did, by the way, coming from the lowest of the 10 income deciles in this country. And we talk a lot about how we're going to serve our low income students, and I really strongly feel that is at the intersection of Guided Pathways reform and student financial stability reform, the two things in which my organization works, and many other organizations in the room, that we can set the table for this work. And then finally, I do think that we're going to spend some time exploring Guided Pathways. I will briefly have a stint, and I know everyone will be waiting this, as a game show host about 45 minutes in to kind of make this a little fun for you guys as we get into it. And then we'll explore these ideas together. I mean, I do think, before I start, this work that I am sharing with you is the work of a large number of people. I do think that the Community College Research Center and Achieving the Dream in different ways both have key foundational roles to have set this up. Achieving the Dream, 15 years old now, Ryan, I don't know, somewhere in that range. starting the foundation for looking at evidence in this country on the ground of community colleges, and the Community College Research Center just established its 20th anniversary. And the Guided Pathways movement itself, I think, has origins in some things colleges did, mainly in the four-year space, but also has origins in some key writing that came out of CCRC, whether it was The Shapeless River by Judith Scott Creighton, Get With a Program with Davis and Tom and others, that I'll talk a little bit about where I think it's important to trace the history of this movement a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that, but then we'll get into the kind of movement itself. So let me start, though, by talking about, I like to start with this. Now, I used to finish with it. Now I start with it. It's a couple things. The story is a story of hope. It's a story of optimism. It's also a call to action. And it's the story of Georgia State University. Now, SUNY, and I come from California, by the way. I grew up in California. And I would say that there's a friendly / healthy competition between who has the base state university system in the country, between SUNY and CUNY. You guys can deal with that on your own. That's not me to be involved with it. You guys can fight that one out. And the CSU-UC system in California. This could be size. It could be, liberal elitism. Who knows? But we have two very strong systems of higher education, SUNY, CUNY, and UC-CSU. Having said that, in most states, and it's still true, by the way, in SUNY especially, and CSU, less so a little in UC, that we have a large number of regional four-year schools, right? The way this works in most states, now this is not necessarily the case in New York or California as much, is I'm going to take Chris's state in Michigan, because I've done a lot of work there. You got a flagship university that is highly selective, flagship public that's highly selective, right? Takes essentially the top 3 to 5% high school graduating class, has, in this particular case, because it's one of the top ones, 85% graduation rate. University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The maize in gold, is that what that is, Chris? Close enough. Maize is gold, right, sorry. Yeah, it's close enough. And then there's a second flagship, and this is where I usually get in trouble in most states. I'm sparing myself that here in New York, because then I start describing the color of the second flagship, and all those people get mad that they're the second flagship, not the top. This would, of course, be the Green College in Michigan, Michigan State, the Spartans. See, there we go. And by the way, what we're talking about in terms of these colleges is their selectivity and what goes with that, graduation rates. We're not talking about quality of education. We're not actually talking about teaching and learning. I could make a pretty strong argument that there's a stronger focus on teaching and learning in regional four-year schools and community colleges because more of the faculty are there for that purpose. We could have that debate. That could take an hour and a half. But once you get past the flagship and second flagship, you got a lot of regional four-year schools. As a college basketball fan and former broadcaster, we called them the directional schools. Southwest Texas, Northeast Louisiana, Western Michigan, the schools where perfectly good schools of higher education, but not as selective. And what most people don't know about higher education, and I don't actually know what it is in SUNY, I'd be curious what the overall graduation rate of the SUNY system is for the four-year schools. If I had to guess, because it's one of the stronger ones, I would guess it's in the 50s, right? Am I close on that? Anyone know? A little higher. See, this is what of course, she's just saying that. It might just, a little higher. But yeah, you are very special, as I started with, was very carefully started with that. But in most states, you get to the regional four-year schools, the graduation rates drop into the 40s and the 30s, and in some cases, the 20s. So this myth of higher education, all four-year schools have really good graduation rates, all two-year schools don't. Well, I can share with you some stories from my work on the Aspen Prize of two-year colleges that have an 80% completion rate. And we definitely know of some four-year schools that are actually in the teens and 20s. Why is this important? Because the story of economic mobility and equity in this country, as I'm going to make a point in the second set of this, is the story of access to higher education, at least as part of that story, is by the regional four-year schools and community colleges. I'll show you some data on this. It's particularly striking on who we are serving and why our mission, which we may not have had originally, is a mission of equity and economic mobility, whether we like it or not. But if you go to these schools, and you go to a place like Georgia State, this is all set up for why we're talking about a four-year college first. We're doing that for two reasons. One, the Guided Pathways movement, this is something most people don't really glom onto, largely started in the four-year space. It started at places like Georgia State and Florida State are usually seen as the two progenitors of this work in the four-year state, as well as places like Austin Peay in Tennessee and Arizona State. I mean, some R1s in there as well, but colleges that had reflected on some data, and the story at Georgia State, by the way, And this is a really important piece of the story. We're in the early 2000s now, 2002, 2003. They get a new president, they get a new provost. They look at their data and say, we have a 31% graduation rate here at Georgia State University. This is, by the way, anyone from Georgia, that area? This is downtown Atlanta. This is an urban regional four-year. It is in between the freeway and downtown. My favorite story about doing a site visit here is we went into their newest building that they had just, not built, but acquired. They just take the latest failed bank building and convert it into like office space, student services, and the top 8 floors are classrooms. It's really fascinating. It's an urban downtown campus. It's a college with a 31% graduation rate. As I mentioned, that's not that unusual. But what happened next there, and I think this is something for all of you to consider, may be the most important point in the process. What they said was, this is not okay. It's actually not okay that only 3 of the 10 people who come to our institution reach their goals. Anyone know what the National Community College graduation plus transfer, completion plus transfer rate is? I know we could argue about numerators and denominators for a long time, but largely it's around 35%. 40% in some systems that are a little stronger, but we hover around 35%, right? So we're kind of right there. We're right there in this mindset. What these guys said, though, as they looked at this is not okay. This means that 7 out of 10 of our students who come to us do not reach their goals. And that's not okay. And I will submit to you that if you're on a campus or you're at a system, you've got to come to the place of, this is, I think, a story Achieving the Dream helped us see really well. You've got to come to the place where you're okay with the fact that you have this data, and you believe that it is true. And what does that cause you to think you should move forward? I think for a lot of us it causes us to think this is not okay to leave it here, right? It's not okay to do nothing and have it stay at 35%. Now, we're not doing things intentionally to keep 65 out of 100 students from reaching their goals. Call it benign neglect at worst, right? At worst. And every one of you, by the way, could sit and list 7 reasons why students don't complete. And my guess, it would be very interesting if we kind of sorted those reasons into locus of control. I'm a social psychologist, by the way, in full disclosure. And locus of control is the idea that when some people think about problems, they think about the things that they control in trying to solve the problem. A lot of people think about the things that are the fault of other people or other systems, right? There's a great history in education in this country of blaming the system before you for its problems. Graduate programs blame undergraduate schools for not teaching people how to write. Undergrad programs blame community college. 4-year schools blame 2-year schools, although our students do the same or better when they transfer. They still blame community colleges. We blame high schools, right, left and right. Just give us more qualified students. High schools, by the way, blame elementary schools. Everyone blames students. And their parents in many cases, by the way. We tend to blame their parents when they're underrepresented minorities or poor, as if those are the parents who don't care about education. When in my experience, those are the parents who care more about education because they know it's actually the path out of intergenerational poverty, right? But we tend to unintentionally or intentionally blame every system before us, right? So this notion of locus of control is, what do we control in this? This is why this story is so important. What I'm about to show you is we control far more than we thought, right? We control far more than we thought. So they get to this first place and they say it's not okay. So what do? Yes, CCRC, ATD, NCI, more organizations in the world, they looked at data. They first looked at a bunch of data, and they looked at my least favorite metric in higher education, which is, in fact, fall-to-fall retention, which I find absolutely useless on average, because it always, when I looked at it, at any college I was at or when I was running data for other colleges, over any given 10-year period, it tends to look like this, which is what? Dead flat, right? Small community colleges, it can bump, right? Retention can bump at small community colleges. Why? It's the number one thing that bumps it. The economy, right? The economy tanks. We get a bunch more students. They're kind of transitory students. They're not really invested in the institution. Economy gets better, they leave. So your fall-to-fall retention was probably best in fall 11, and then it got horrible in fall 12 and fall 13 because all those students left, or it went back to where it was. By the way, enrollment spikes. Smaller community colleges, that has a bigger effect, right? And by the way, the other thing you would see if this was a community college is it sure as hell wouldn't be 82%. Right? It'd be like 57, 58, 61, somewhere in there, but where our 2-year kind of our fall-to-fall retention is. So the point, and by the way, they started doing this around here. They looked back 10 years, it looked exactly the same. So you look at this and go, well, on one hand, fall-to-fall retention really isn't that important, but it does actually, anyone see what, looking at the slide, one thing that kind of jumps to mind? We've got 8 out of 10 students who we have here fall to fall, but we only have 3 out of 10 graduating. So here's one myth of higher education shot. Just get them through the first year, it's all good. We spend a lot of time getting students, like if we do spend time and money on this first year experience idea, which by the way is not a bad idea, but apparently it's not enough. Just getting students through the first year, that's necessary, but clearly not sufficient, because half the people who entered Georgia State weren't completing after they were there for more than a year. So this causes you to ask more questions. And among the many questions they asked is one that was both their epiphany and was one of my personal favorites. They asked the following question, which is, how many students are retained and have sophomore status? What does that mean? They are 1/4 of the way to a 4-year degree. They are perfectly on path, if you will. They are academic sophomores. At 120 units semester school, they are 30 units on path, 30 applicable units to a degree at the end of the first year. For most of our community college students, this would be 30 on the way to 60 if you're a semester school. So how many of the students were both retained and had sophomore status? And that number was 22%. Now there is a almost universal soft groan when this number comes up. And I caution people who are at community colleges not to groan too much. Anyone have the idea what this is at your campus? If I was to ask you what percentage of your students are halfway to a 2-year degree after 1 year? Does anyone know that number, by the way? Okay, I can share with you at most community colleges, unless you're highly technical cohort-based career programs, which by the way is an idea that's about to come back up a couple of times, that number will hover between 12 and 15%. So hold on a sec though, why? Why is it so low? Why is it so low for these guys? There's one additional reason that would make it so low for us as well, even lower. Financial aid. Say more about financial aid.
Financial aid has defining resources depending on how we use the class.
Yeah, so there's the satisfactory progress part of financial aid. I mean, although financial aid does require essentially full-time enrollment to get most of it. So that actually would push the number up some, but it's a good point. What else? Developmental courses. I mean, none of the developmental courses count. Like the long sequences we had historically, which were well-intentioned, by the way, made perfect sense to us. Didn't really work very well. But large, you've taken 9, 12 units, 15 units of dev ed in your first year, you have no chance of reaching 30 credit units. What are some other reasons? I like you guys because the dominant reason that's cited you guys have not hit yet, which I like because of what it is. Yes?
Financial aid is 12 credits.
Financial aid is 12 versus 15, right? 15 is halfway to 30. 4 quarters at 15 will get you to 60. 4 quarters at 12 get you to 48. You're not on path. And before your mind goes to, by the way, our students can't handle 15 units. They can only handle 12. 2 things. One, anytime that you say our students can't handle, the shriek of institutional racism radars should be going off in your head. Anytime you say our students can't handle, you're not talking about what you think your better students are. You're talking about your students who think are struggling, who tend to be what? They tend to be poor, which in this country is highly correlated with being black and brown. So careful when we go to that. Thank you. From our lone African-American woman in the room, if I'm looking around. Yes, exactly. By the way, what's your name? Dara? Dara, you and I are going to talk in this next 45 minutes. All right, let me just tell you. I usually have more champions of this cause, but you guys all can be, along with me. I don't know if you noticed, I'm pretty white. But I think these issues are important to call out, right? So that's a good one, 12 to 15. The other thing, by the way, when I was at Foothill, I divided my students into 3 unit-taking bands, 0 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 9. Who was my most successful group? 18 or more. Now, obviously, that's a trick question, because who are those students? They're the highly motivated, coming full-time students who are in cohort-based CTE programs. But before we go to too many units is bad, think about why too many units might be bad. Right? We'll explore that a little bit later. What's one other huge reason, though? It's usually used as an excuse. Our students are part-time. We got so many part-time students, they can't be on path, right? Well, 2 things about that. See, this is why I like you guys, because you didn't automatically go to that one, which I think is fine. But there's 2 things about part-time students. One, we're not doing them any favors by either allowing or encouraging them to go part-time, because as depressing as your completion plus transfer rates are for full-time students, for part-time students, unless you're really unique, those are also numbers that hover around 15%, right? So they're just part-time, we can't do anything. Well, if you're not doing things to help them stop being part-time, you're dooming them to 6 out of 7 failing, or 5 out of 6 failing. Now, failing to reach their goals rather than failing anything individual. We'll talk about part-time students' guided pathways in the second part of the section. The other thing is we assume that part-time status is fixed. What does that mean? It assumes, well, that's out of our control, whether students go full-time or part-time. They have life events. They have things that happen to them. They need to work. All of that is true, right? We can do a couple things on the financial stability side to help more of them to get tied to public benefits. The good work I know goes on in this state more than most. The stuff that the Working Student Success Network and ATD does. I worked on this project called Beyond Financial. It ties students to public benefits, help them with childcare, nutrition, transportation, the things that matter in their life so they can come more full-time. But there's also another thing about why students are part-time. And this is the one as a social psychologist that's more insidious to me. And I'm going to tell you a story. So I am on the road 200 days a year. And appearances may belie this a little bit. I do occasionally spend time in brew pubs and sports bars around the country. By the way, newsflash, there's a lot of good beer in this country. And I'm wearing most of it. But I'm on the road. I spend all these nights in hotels. I go to the local sports bar, brew pub, and I just hang out and take my computer, right? I hang out and work. If I'm not out with Baldwin making trouble, which is a whole other story. That's the 5 o'clock Friday story, not the 1 o'clock Friday. But I'm hanging out with my computer. So after a while, what will happen is the server, the bartender, the waiter, the waitress, will ask me, hey, what do you do? Because I'm there at the computer watching sports, and that's kind of weird, which I'm cool with. And I say, well, I work, this took a while to get this down to 2 sentences. Well, I work as a consultant in higher education. I work to help mainly community colleges and regional 4-year schools improve their completion rate so that more students reach their goals. And I cannot tell you how many times I hear what comes up next. You guys all hear this too. Oh, I go to Broome? I take the one I can't read or pronounce. I go to Broome, the local community college. I say, cool, you go to Broome. What are you doing at Broome? What's your major? What are you trying to do there? So 3 answers are dominant when I ask these questions. One is they know exactly what they're doing. I'm in the welding program. I'm in surgical technology. I'm transferring to SUNY Stony Brook. Is that anywhere near you? Yes. Damn, I was close. Binghamton. Bad on New York geography. I'm transferring to SUNY Binghamton. I want to get there in 2 years. I'm going to have junior standing in sociology, right? There are a group of students who answer that way. That's kind of unusual, but it does happen, right? Then the second group of students says, yeah, I want to transfer. Hey, where are you thinking of going? I don't know, a 4-year school. Cool, that's better than transferring within the 2-year program, although not without some value. Any idea what you want to do that? No, I'm really kind of still working on that. Which actually, part of me wants to start immediately doing advising, which I subtly do over the next period about however long my bar tab goes. But then the third group is the most interesting one to me. And this is the one that's most relevant to the part-time. Anyone know where I'm going with this? I'm just taking some classes. You guys all get this in your community when you're out and they know you work at the college. Oh, I take some classes there. This disturbs me deeply. Because what we have created is we've made, and I love the Access mission, by the way. The Access mission, I'm going to talk about how we democratized higher education in this country in the mid-20th century. I really think it was the GI Bill and community colleges that did that. We did a really good job with that. But the one net result of that is this notion that I'm just taking some classes. Well, what are you taking classes for? That often, by the way, is the first time that student's ever been asked that. Or they say, yeah, I'm just taking some classes. Like, this is a hard thing to get out of. So it's very easy to go part-time. It also, by the way, to use a dating analogy, is very easy to break up with us. It's very easy to leave a community college. One of the things, this is a guided pathways thing I usually do, but unless you're in a cohort-based CTE program, meaning you're going to direct entry in the workforce with a bunch of your peers, or you're another group I'm going to talk about in a little while, you can leave the college and no one knows it. You're a statistic. I always pick on psychology, not because there's anything wrong with psychology particularly. Although I will say, it's the second largest undergraduate major in this country. At any given time, 14 to 15% of American undergrads are psych majors, which does cause one to ask the question, what percentage of American jobs are jobs that are held by psychologists? That's about 0.4%. Maybe a misalignment problem here. By the way, most of those require master's or a doctorate, which to a part-time student might as well be a rocket like ship to the moon in terms of its likelihood of happening in their lives without moving to full-time. But these students, when they say, I'm only taking some classes, they have no sense of purpose. They have no idea why they're there. We've made it really easy to just take some classes. It is our unit of measure. The course is the unit of measure. It's how we do everything. They sign up for courses. We offer courses. We give them grades in courses. We assign faculty to courses. Everything the unit of measure is the course. The problem is they're not seeing the forest for the trees, and historically we haven't helped them do that. So what do we not have? We don't have a value proposition to that student. They have absolutely no idea, not that this ever would happen at Broome. I'll use another Michigan college. So at Lansing in Michigan, because that would never happen here, they have many students, there's a group of students that have no idea why they're at the college. And you may have, by the way, services to help them, but they don't have any idea why they're here. So it is really easy to go part-time. It's really easy to leave us, and that's a problem. And it's a problem, I think, that helps lead to some of the data being where they are. So I agree. These are all reasons. They're at 22%. We're at 15. So course, by the way, course taking, like not passing courses is another big reason. You can take 15 units. If you only pass half your courses, you're only getting to 15 out of 30. Now, I'm going to show you what happened over a 10-year period here at Georgia State. And what they did, and you're going to want to know exactly what they did. Before we called it Guided Pathways, what did they do? They highly structured their programs of study, so every student knew exactly what to take in what order. They helped students explore careers and choose those programs earlier. They monitor progress of students through the pathways first and maybe still better than anyone in the country. You cannot fall through the cracks there. Once you start deviating from your pathway, someone helps you get back on path or pick a new one. You don't fall through the cracks. They also, by the way, work deeply on financial stability reform, which I think is a sidelight to their work. They're one of the leaders in the country at things like emergency aid. Their provost one year got really crazy. They realized that they had one of those policies where all students who had a balance on their account were prohibited from registering for the next semester. So one semester, the finance, I don't know if it's associate provost of the finance, convinced the provost, hey, I'm going to waive all those balances and see what happens. So students got a $382 balance they owe us. We're going to call them and tell them it's gone if you re-enroll. Interesting. All right, so it was a bet. What happened? 90% of those students re-enrolled. First thing that happened is the college got the financial aid and the tuition that came along with that, mostly from outside sources. It was wildly financially profitable. And did they know that some students were misusing the system, by the way, and intentionally running up $262 bills over time and leaving them? Yeah. Overall, was it a benefit to them? Yeah. They've been doing it still. They still do it like 6 years later. Right? Not to say that's something you should go do tomorrow, but the point is they're working on the notion of financial stability. Here's what happened to their data. So I've made up a lot of data sets, not in public, but for my classes. I try not to make up the public ones. For like when I teach research methods or psychology or statistics, and I would never make up a data set that looked like this unless it was like a graduate exam in education. Explain to me how this is possible. Fall-to-fall retention stays the same, and by the way, you can't use grade inflation as your answer. And we triple the number of students who have made progress along the pathway. So they went from 22 to 67. So at the end of the first year, starting in fall 08, 2 out of 3 students were not only retained, but perfectly on path. Again, what did they do? All the hallmarks of Guided Pathways reform. They made a more clear path for students, what to take in what order. They helped students get into those programs early. By the way, they significantly reformed DevEd. Another myth of higher education, the regional 4-year schools don't have to do DevEd. Well, of course they do. Half their students, quote unquote, need it under the historical definitions. They worked on that. They worked on monitoring progress. They worked on financial stability. And by the way, everyone also wants to know what they do right here. So it shot up. I mean, it goes steady and shoots up. Where's the secret sauce that happens right there? Got to do a site visit with these guys. What they said was, we didn't do anything different, anything new that year. We did versions 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0, everything we started back here. And because they're human, they did all the stuff in silos at first, like we always do. They connected them. They connected them into a holistic student experience. So this slide's cool. I like data. This is a good slide. It's a little green for the dark room, but you know. The next slide, though, is the most, if you remember one slide from today, and I want to tell you, if you go back to your campus and you're helping a college try to come to their place where they really want to go down this path, you're going to need to show a slide like the next one over and over. And that is what happened to their graduation rate from 10 years ago to today. And this is more like 13 years ago to 3 years ago now. The data's a little bit dated. So pause for a second. All right. So what happened? 10 years ago, their white students graduated at 32%. It went up 18 points to 50%. So in the last decade, they've improved their white students by 18 points. African American students went from basically 26% to 56%, a 30-point increase. And Hispanic students went from 22 to 55, a 33-point increase. So a couple things about this before there are inevitably questions about this. One, they did not change the caliber of their entering student over this time frame. They did not say the student's the problem. They actually jokingly said, we didn't search for some student we used to have in the late 60s who came in a station wagon, had a care package every week. By the way, they never had that student to begin with. That's not what you're doing, is looking for better students. They said, we're going to do this with the students we have. Their average SAT score at entry of their entering student class, which is not very high, by the way, did not change. In fact, they don't tell people this. It's actually down between 10 and 15 points. So the other thing is, how many African American and Latino students did they have 10 years ago versus today? Because this is when we start throwing out other fun terms which should set off alarm bells. The more challenging student population, quote unquote. Very thinly veiled code for poor, black, and brown again. They're more challenging. Well, and interestingly, if we're going to use those terms, which I wouldn't, far more challenging where the red bars occurred than where the blue bars occurred. They used to be about 70% white. Now they're 58% white. Mainly African American students in Georgia. Obviously, you don't have a lot of Latino students in downtown Atlanta. But they're now over 40% African American. Actually, over 30% African American, over 40% underrepresented minority. So the student, this is interesting to me, right? Because what term have we all heard used historically to explain the difference in the blue bars? What's the term we always use? The achievement gap. This is the so-called unable to change achievement gap. Now again, language. Achievement gap suggests that the problem was with the student. It was the student's achievement that was the result or the cause of these being different. So we need to fix the student and their achievement to work on this gap. It's an equity author named Gloria Ladson-Billings who I think was really interesting, who talked about we need to reframe this term achievement gap into what she called educational debt that the system has accrued over time. Now, this was like 10 years ago when I read her, so I don't know if she's still around working, but if she is, she should really grab this slide and say, this is what I was talking about. Because they didn't change the student at Georgia State, they changed the system. They changed the culture. And now what do you have? You have no so-called achievement gap. In fact, there's a slight reverse achievement gap. And by the way, there's not a lot of programs to help their white rich students figure out the value of higher education. Right, that didn't happen afterwards in Georgia. They trying not to fix those students and their parents. We see a place where this is one of the only colleges in the country, by the way. One of the only colleges in the country where African American and Latino students graduate at a higher rate than white students. This is the power of what you're working with here if you go down this path. First of all, another part of this story, go back to here. It's a 10-year story, maybe 13 years if you go back to now. This does not happen overnight. Tom and his colleagues talked about it in the book. This is a long-term change process. This is not something that you do like this. The good news is it's also not something you have to start from scratch doing. When we talk about the four big pillars one second, we talk about the four big pillars of guided pathways. These are things you've already started working on. The question is at what scale and how deep did you go in the change process to get to some of these big ideas? Yes?
So my question is, you talk about all the factors that go into, fixing the graduation and retention rate.
Uh-huh.
So how do you know that guided pathways are a solution when you also address financial stability and debt everything? How do you give a screen?
There is no double-blind randomized study of this. It's a great point, Nina, and it's something we were just talking about in the back. We all want there to be that level of clarity about higher ed outcomes data, and aside from some very rare cases, we don't have it. I think, so what I'd like to tell folks is, we know what the big ideas that were involved in the things that the colleges that have done this are, and we've put them under an umbrella we call guided pathways. Getting students on a path, getting them, clarifying what the path is, making sure they're staying on it, making sure that they're learning what we say they're learning at an institutional and program level. And I do put over here financial stability as a side, a related kind of separate area of thinking that we're integrating. But it's a great question. And I will say this, we have emerging data on guided pathways. This is the most complete data at scale from Georgia State. Florida State would be the other place. We have really, Arizona State, also some pretty good data. You look at the similar, remember these three places did this very independently, and they did it at, but what's interesting are the hallmarks of what their change processes were have the same features that we put under these four pillars. But you're absolutely right, we don't have. Tom, anything you want to say on that as you think about this more? Like as you reflect on this idea that we don't have, I mean, you work at Columbia, I know that as in a research center, in the perfect world we would have this type of data, but no one knows more about the data you have than you guys do. So what would you say?
Well, I mean, we have data from pieces of this in community colleges. We have data on how students do in their first year, historically, under what circumstances those have led to higher graduation rates. So we have data like that, so I think that's one thing. There are other smaller studies that have looked at different pieces or especially at programs that stick with students the whole way through. I think that's an important point that you made. I think a lot of reforms only look at the first year or do that. So I mean, we're beginning to accumulate some information. I mean, in Tennessee now they're talking about having some graduation rates. And I mean, I think the issue that you raised, though, is Tennessee has done many things.
Right.
I mean, I think they're all good, and part of that story is that most of those things fall under the kind of characteristics of guided pathways, so that we can look at those data and say, I think maybe there's something else we don't know about that also took place in Tennessee at that time. But I think if you put together the different reforms that they've done that are very consistent with this argument, that you'll see that their graduation rates are coming up. So,
You know, the other thing I always throw out there is the term convergent validity. This is an old research methods term when I used to teach research methods, which is you can have, if 50 studies show the same thing and they each have one different small thing wrong with them, there's a tendency in the academic field to say, we have no evidence to support whatever that thing being studied was, because they each had one thing wrong that 100 reviewers look at, 2 people found one thing wrong they didn't like. And it doesn't discredit the study, but it's always a caveat. Like, you always have the caveat in the academic research. And the notion of convergent validity is if you have 50 different studies that are finding 1 or 2 small caveat, at some point you have to come to the conclusion there's something going on here. Like, I mean, I use this when we talk about dev ed reform around acceleration models or co-rec models. I mean, they're all slightly different, right? Some of them, those actually are double-blind, or at least blind studies. But yeah, we have to come to, at some point, I think the harder part is, like, as a researcher, like, from a multiple regression standpoint, which variable is it that has more R squared, to get really dorky for a second? I don't think we're there yet, right? I think we have some people who've studied the data and with initial conclusions, but I think it's a really good point.
I mean, you know, there's the ASAP study.
Right.
That show that kind of, now those are still done with small groups of students, and they're expensive. You know, we think that many of the guided pathways principles can actually get ASAP-like results on a broader scale. And that's what. So, Gutman, which is of course another. It's a unique college, but it has all of these characteristics. The students it takes don't have. I mean, the characteristics of the students that you can measure are no better than the typical CUNY student. So I think there's a lot of different. There's the Florida State data, which are very similar to this, and so I think we're beginning to accumulate a lot of evidence about this. I mean, we are now doing major programming trying to measure these outcomes. I mean, I think over the next 2 or 3 years, that at least at Community Health Research Center, that's a major activity. One of the main things that we're going to try to do.
Chris?
I just want to add, I mean, we're not far enough into some of these reforms. And Rob said it takes a long time, and I think the colleges, the community colleges that we have that are furthest along are colleges that were involved in a completion by design initiative in Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. And again, it's going to be hard to isolate the individual things that are paying off, but we're seeing movement in those numbers. So I don't know if we have...
No, and what I'm going to now move on, because I'm going to tease something I'm going to get to after the economic mobility is, I'm going to explore, Nina, 2 groups you already have, I think you already have both of them, in your community college, who are already highly successful. And what we're going to do is actually explore what we think the reasons are for their success. And I think when you do that, we'll see a connection here too. So again, I think this notion of kind of emerging and converging validity is an important one. All right, final story on this is, you got to believe this is possible to engage in the deep type of change work that it takes to move the needle at your colleges. Because your needle has been moving roughly the same way for most of the last 20 years from an outcome standpoint. How many colleges' completion plus transfer rate is up more than 5 points over the last 20 years? Good point. Mohawk Valley? There you go. By the way, that's about the number. How many colleges are represented in the room? 25, 30? I mean, about 1 out of 30 is what we see. That could be random chance, because you'd expect 1 out of 30 to get better. Could be something he's doing, though, or his college is doing. But my point is, most of us are static in terms of our outcomes. We've tried a lot in the last 20 years. So I think one of the observations is the depth of the change and the scale of the change has to be bigger than what we've tried historically. Every college has a vast amount of experience with doing things differently with small numbers of students for short periods of time. We're talking about doing larger things differently for long periods of time, if not at scale. And I think that's a key story here. The other thing is, don't let this be data on a chart. In your head, go to the place that these are people. What does this mean? What it means is, at a college that had 18,000 students, Georgia State, 4,000 students roughly a year are new. So in the early 2000s, if you started at Georgia State, 1,200 of any 4,000 students roughly would graduate. Now that number, 10 years later, is 2,300. So that means 1,100 students a year start at Georgia State today who, if they had started a decade ago, would not have graduated, who complete today. Multiply it times 10. Take a decade of students at your college. They're talking about 11,000 students who are today meeting their goals who did not 10 years ago. And remember, they didn't change the student. They look, this to me is proof that we have so much more control over this than we thought we did. By the way, at this time in Georgia, there was not extra money going to the colleges. There was not extra money going to the students. In fact, the Hope Scholarship in Georgia, I love this story. The Hope Scholarship in Georgia, which is something for Georgia high school students who transition to Georgia Publics, they can get a certain portion of their tuition paid if they keep a 3.0. Some legislator, this is what happens, usually any phrase that starts with some legislator doesn't end well, by the way. Some legislator, I love my legislators, I say that, I don't know why. Some legislator said, you know, this is a great idea, but we're spending a little too much on this program. We'll make one small change, is that you need to keep a 3.0 within every semester. Meaning that if you have a 3.8 and you get 2 C's, a B, and an A one semester, you lose the Hope Scholarship for good. Obviously, from a financial stability standpoint, and by the way, the student's shaking his head the hardest right now, just so you know. You think about the effects of policies on students. Just have students in the room and they're going, seriously? Someone did that? Point being, this did not get easier for these colleges or the system during this 10-year period. There was not some magic secret sauce that happened in Georgia. It was hard work, and I will tell you from having done the site visit there a couple of years ago, this sense has a palpable, this place, everyone at this place has a palpable understanding of their role in the change mission and in the new culture that they've created. It is like Valencia in the community college space, where, I mean, I know we all sit from the side and go, it's just Valencia, Kool-Aid, great. If you're there, you realize there's something different, and there's something tangibly different about the culture they've created. This is somewhat within our control, and you have to believe that's possible. If you get into 18 months in and you're getting depressed, or you're getting to the hard part of the work, or you're talking about whether this elective is going to be on a pathway, you say, why are we doing this? Your answer cannot be because John, the administrator, told me so, or because President Kress says this is a good idea, or because Tom, that's a good reason to do something in my opinion, but it's not a good long-term change process, or because Tom wrote a book, or because ATD's been around for 15 years. It cannot be an external motivation, or the Gates Foundation funded all this because they're trying to get rid of higher education, which I hear all the time, by the way. I like that one, but it's interesting. You have to do this because it's about the students. If you don't believe this is about the students, it's not going to go anywhere. We're trying to change a system of higher education that has been largely traveling in the same direction for 600 years, right? To transition to the next point about economic mobility in higher education, who did the system of higher education serve in 1300 and 1400? The offspring of the ruling elite, right? That's the only people who went to university. Whether it's the monasteries or Edinburgh or Oxford, everyone argues about where it started. This system, if you go to university, you wander around, you take some courses, you get some learning, and eventually someone grants you a degree, worked really well if you were already a member of the rich ruling elite. Probably were white, by the way. The rich ruling elite, and male, thank you, Kathleen, good point, right? So this model of wandering and finding yourself is a 600-year-old model. We talked about it. We democratized higher education, this company, GI Bill, community colleges. Millions of students have access to higher education that didn't have it anymore. The model's basically stayed the same. I mean, one question I used to ask is, and this is a little different now, this is like 2005 question. So if I was to go into a history classroom in 2005 and then one in 1905, what was actually different about what was going on in that classroom? Nothing, right? For the most part. Now we have technology. Rather than writing on the chalkboard, or on steel, like concrete slabs or something 800 years ago. We didn't have papers, that was a problem. We had the overheads, now we had PowerPoint, right? That's all good. Now, teaching and learning has come a long way, especially in the last decade. But the system of higher education, arranging courses, has largely been the same, right? And what we did, though, is we democratized access to higher education. And look, if you guys all had 88% completion rates, I would be here wearing a different hat, which is my Aspen Prize hat, to figure out how you would win producing an 88% completion rate. But yours is probably between 35 and 45. So the question is, what are many of our students not getting that they could under a different model? What I want to do, I'm going to do this in 10 minutes. This is going to go really fast because I want to get to the fun stuff. What this story is about the notion is, when we talk about higher education, we like to say, yeah, it's not just about money. It's not just about economic ability. It's not just about careers. How many of you actually work on a campus in this room? Most of the room? I want you to answer the following question for me. What percentage of your students attend your college solely for the love of learning? Anyone want to guess this number's greater than 5%? Okay, by the way, if you do, cool. By the way, I had one faculty member, the last one, I said, it's definitely above 5%. They're here for the love of learning. I'm like, what do you teach? She's like, math. I'm like, that is not true. I'm sorry, unless you have some special program we don't know about. Look, first of all, I'd argue 98% of your students are career focused. They're either going direct entry into a workforce, or if you go 9 straight years, 4 years undergrad, 2 years master's, 3 years, by the way, if you do that, you better have a career that's going to pay off all your student loans, which I'm still paying off. They're career focused. One of these false distinctions, by the way, between career and transfer, or even worse, career and academic, which is highly insulting to those folks who teach in these cohort-based programs, who, by the way, produce the best outcomes on your campus in terms of people moving to reach their goals. But they're all career focused. Maybe 2 or 3% of them are here because they love learning. They want to stay as long as they can. I will point out, by the way, disproportionately, those students end up wandering their way through higher education, finding themselves and working in academia. So we are very protective. We tend to be very protective of this. I love wandering because it's what I did. But it's not working for most of your students. It's especially not working for your lower income students who don't have the time or the resources to wander around for a long time. And just really quickly, I don't have a lot of time to go into this. This does not mean a liberal arts education isn't important. I can actually argue it's more important in 2017 than it was in 1967. Why? Because when you got a college degree in 1967, although it didn't necessarily have to be in what field you went into, more then than now, what field you went into, you tended to stay in for 30 years, right? 2017, we estimate, 4 to 5 different careers for most people. Some people say, well, then why guided pathways? Well, first of all, we'd like to get them into a career rather than to a dead-end job. And secondly, do a good job with a liberal arts education, they'll be ready and prepared to move between the various careers they have. So look, I'm a social scientist. I believe in a liberal arts education. But I think we can't use that as a defense for a lack of structure and a lack of cohesion within our systems to help more students move through it. That's not a defense for the lack of cohesion. It's an observation that these need to be built into whatever you do. We'll talk about this a little bit. Well, I will say this, economic mobility, you know what it matters most to? Haven't been there. Poor people. Right? You got unlimited time and unlimited resources. Economic mobility doesn't matter a whole lot. You come from the lower half or the lower decile of the income spectrum, it matters a lot, right? And so this is the point of these next slides, is to point out just how many of our students in community colleges are from the lowest income spectrum. It's a range, right? And this is, again, the thing I will point out one more time. You may see a thread here. There's an unfortunate correlation in the US between race and income level. So whether you're talking race or economic mobility, you are talking about equity. Right? And if you don't believe that race and income, first of all, there's lots of rural white poverty in America. Wherever you are politically, I spent a lot of time last fall traveling around Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, rural places in North Carolina. I understand what happened in the election. I personally was not a big fan of what happened, but I understand what happened. Right? There's rural white poverty in this country too. However, before we disaggregate this whole income and race are related, you tell me the zip code in this country where on average African American or Latino citizens make more money than white citizens. If you know of that zip code, let me know, because I have never found it. Every zip code where they have analysis of income, it is always better for the white citizens than it is for African American and Latino citizens. So these are, while I think economic mobility, quote unquote, is a safer way to enter this conversation, you've got to call out this is still fundamentally related. And so if you are interested in the so-called achievement gap at your college, this as a lever to work on, this economic mobility lever is incredibly important. All right, I usually joke, when I think of those institutions in this country who are the bastions of helping the poor, I think of Stanford, Brown, and Harvard. Berkeley, MIT, and Cambridge. By the way, I went to one of these institutions, so I'm making fun of my own institution. And the interesting thing is these are economists from these institutions who are pointing out, by the way, their own institutions are not the solution to economic mobility in this country. And why are they not? Well, let's take a look at Harvard, up the road here. Let's take a look at the parent income distribution at Harvard. So we're going back to students born in 80 to 82 because we need to let them graduate and then follow their income to see what happened afterwards. So if you think Harvard's changed in the last 10 years, you can make an argument that they're doing something different now. They're not, by the way. Point is, if you look at Harvard, 70% of their students come from the top income quartile of parent income distribution, quintile. And by the way, 15% come from the top 1%. So by the way, the American dream would be, in as much as it's defined by access to elite higher education, 20% across the board. No matter which income quintile you came from, you'd have an equal chance of getting into Harvard. Now, it is not in Harvard's mission to be the American dream of higher education, right? That never wasn't what they were designed for. They do occasionally pay lip service to these access issues. But the point here is you've got more students up here in the top 1% whose parents make over $700,000 a year than you do almost in the bottom 3 quintiles. Okay, so let's go past Harvard and look at, and I love this is my favorite new designation. It's the Ivy Plus. Columbia should be like fighting back against this new designation. Like, it's the Ivy Plus. So we have the Ivy League schools, that's cool, but we're going to add 4 more. And I would point out that both MIT and Stanford have researchers on this project. So now we have a new designation. It's the Ivy Plus. Making fun of my institution, Stanford, by the way. But the point here is, here are 12 elite institutions in this country. Let's look at their distribution of parent income. So 15% of the students at these 12 institutions are from the top 1% of parent income, which is more than the entire bottom 50%. I mean, that's just pause for a second. It means that these 12 institutions, where 12 of maybe the 30, I don't know where to go down, 30 to 35 institutions in this country where you could have a degree in anything from this institution and it has marketplace value that gives you a lifetime value much higher than other college graduates. So here's 12 of them. There's probably 20 more. There may used to have been 100 more, but I think we could have that discussion offline sometime too. But here are 12 elite institutions. So you are more likely to be from the top 1% than the bottom 50. And also, you're 77 times more likely to go to an elite private if you're from the top 1% versus the bottom 20. I feel very lucky to have been in this bottom 20 and through some bizarre admissions mistake gotten in Stanford. I think it was they needed overweight baseball players. It's a very important niche, by the way, when I was attending college. Let's keep going here. Let's look at some other schools. All right, so if it's not Harvard that's serving the low-income students in this country, who is it? Well, let's take Berkeley. Now, you're going to want to think I'm doing this because I went to Stanford, and Berkeley's supposedly a rival. This is California. There's no rivalries in California. No one cares that much about sports. Like, it's just all a fraud. This is not like Michigan, Notre Dame, or Michigan, Ohio State, or whatever rivalry, either Yankees, Mets, I don't know. But Berkeley, what I love about this, and I let on that I'm fairly liberal, and so I love that Berkeley, by the way, who is the bastion of all things liberal, the free speech movement, we are the left, the Occupy whatever movement, all in Berkeley, right? Well, apparently one thing they didn't get around to was equal access to Berkeley by all income spectra. So they're still pretty elitist, right? This actually shocked me growing up in California and living in California, still part-time now, that it was still this big of a difference between what we might hope access to Berkeley would be. And Berkeley's not the only UC school. It tends to be, UCLA would argue this, rated as the top UC program in terms of the eliteness of it. But it's more like Harvard than it is close to an American dream story. To get to one that's closer to the American dream, and I didn't do this, by the way, I use these slides all the time, is actually an interesting college. SUNY Stony Brook, right? Now this is online. There's someone, now that I'm in New York, this is going to take 30 seconds. Where is this college? It's in Long Island. So I don't, when I immediately think of Long Island, think of economic mobility and stability. Why is that, why is it so, why would this be the case? That, by the way, this is a college, if this is the American dream, it's about as close to you as you get. What is it about Stony Brook is it something they've done to bring in low-income students? Is it where they are? I'm very curious about this slide. I've been waiting to come to New York to ask this question. We're not moving on until I get an answer, just so you know. So I hope you guys are good with that. Strong EOP program. So, I mean, something's happening here so that this college is so open. Strong transfer programs from community colleges in the area.
That's what I was going to say.
You think that too?
I funded them for my old job, and they were actively recruiting from New York City.
Cool. Well, that's fascinating. I'm glad to hear that there are intentional reasons for it. Because from a data standpoint, that's about as close as you get from a four-year school, right, to having open access to all income levels. So that's great. Where does a community college sit on this? Now we're completely in the other direction. Now, this, by the way, is Glendale Community College in California. And if you know LA, which I'm sorry if you do, as a Northern Californian, it's just a thing. If you know LA, this is not exactly the poorest part of LA, right? Glendale's in the San Gabriel Valley. It's next to Pasadena. It's got that classic California suburb of a small pocket of extreme wealth, mostly middle class, and maybe 30 to 40% of low-income students that are like really low income. But so Glendale's not exactly LA Southwest or in Watts or East LA or Richmond up by Oakland. This is a reasonably middle-class area. Yet even in a reasonably middle-class area of LA, this is where the low-income students go, right? So here's our story. Whether we liked it or not, who's serving the low-income students in this country and their access to higher education? It's us, right? And the problem we have, and I think this is what calls for the Guided Pathways movement to come, is that the systems and structures that we use were originally designed and essentially really only work for those with unlimited resources or a strong set of resources and a decent amount of time to navigate us, and a good history of higher education. By the way, just to compare real quickly, since we're in the room with our friends from Columbia, I didn't do this, Tom, the researchers did this. Look at Columbia and Stony Brook, what do you see? Well, what is this bar here? Actually, what this bar is, I'm missing one tag, is the probability that you move into the top income quintile 10 years after graduation based on your parents' income when you started. So this is kind of fascinating to me for a couple reasons. One, it's flat, which actually means once you get into these institutions, your outcomes are the same no matter where you started. By the way, those of you who like affirmative action, it's a pretty strong argument for affirmative action programs, because the outcomes are the same regardless of the entry of those students by an income status. Another interesting thing is that there's not a huge difference between Stony Brook's outcomes and Columbia's, right? The big difference down here, though, is in access. So you got 4 times as many students from the lowest, about 3 times from the second, so that if you look at what we call the access versus success, so here's the percentage of students in the bottom quintile and their success. Columbia sits up here with a host of institutions, the Ivy Plus, who are highly selective, so they don't have a lot of access. They do very well. Where are the the large publics? They sit here, still not very much access, not going as well. Where do the community colleges sit? Down here. We take all students, and historically, we haven't had a huge bump. There are some outliers of colleges, community colleges who've given a bump. Where would we get a bigger bump? If our students completed, if they transferred and got their bachelor's degrees that have the higher wages, we would get these bigger bumps. The point is, whether we like it or not, it's largely our problem to solve. And it's the community colleges who have this mission to solve. I'm going to skip some of these because I want to get now to more direct community college stuff and pathways. All right. So I'm a new student now I'm going to be a new student. I'm going to go back to Michigan because I'm a new student in Michigan. I came from high school, and I know, by the way, you have lots of students that vary across your spectrum. Some come from high school, we have returning adults, we have reverse transfer. But we're going to take a prototypical recent high school graduate. And I want you to tell me what happens to me in the summer. Let's use a New York college. And before you started this 3 years ago, if I was a new student coming to Monroe, what was my summer experience like? What happened to me? What's the first thing that would happen if I said, I'm coming to Monroe and I kind of like psychology? What was my onboarding experience like?
Sure. You would be involved in what we used to call PARS. What does PARS stand for? Program Advisement and Registration.
Okay.
Program Advisement and Registration. And so you'd be brought in, you'd meet with those faculty in that program, and they would help you.
Okay, you're a bad example. All right. That's all cool, but nah. No, I mean, that.
Say we would let you wander around our halls and put your...
Thank you. That's what I'm looking for, Ann. No. Ah, thank you. We're back. Okay, we're back to you guys as an example again. All right. Thank you for bringing. No, I know I did. My question was poor questioning. All right. So I'm a new student. I'm a general liberal arts student, and at most of our colleges, let's just ask more. What happens to me at most of your colleges? What's the first thing that happens in my onboarding experience? Aha. Placement testing. So let's get this straight. I come out of high school, And I have, by the way, your students are not the same, just briefly. I think of any 100 students who enter a community colleges in 3 groups. The top 20 are the unicorns. These are the highly resourced, highly successful historically. They know how to navigate educational systems. They have a lot of social capital. They're going to succeed at your college whether you try to stop them or not, right? You're going to get 19 of those 20 to graduate. I call them the unicorns because everyone thinks we used to have more of these. You never had more of them. It's always been about that number. You've got about 10 to 15 students at the bottom of whatever mythical spectrum I'm talking about who probably aren't going to complete at your college no matter what you do. Now, while I don't want to give up on those students, I do think that this is a group where you're going to get one of 15, the one hero story that comes out of the bottom 15. Got to be careful, by the way, that demographically that group's not different than the middle group. They may be different than the top group at most colleges, but the middle group has 65 students in it. So let's give New York a 40% completion rate total. So you're getting 19 to 20 at the top, you're getting 1 of 15 at the bottom. That means right now you're getting 20 of the 65 students in the middle to successfully move through your college. The point is that's where the leverage is. The leverage is not with your unicorns or the group that's challenged at the bottom. And yet most of what we do, whether intentionally or not, serves the top 20% or the bottom 15% and leaves this mystery middle completely untouched. When I was at Foothill, I asked my researcher, hey, we had a classic drop-in student services model, swipe a card, but we didn't require you to do anything. But we had good data on what they used. I said, hey, Greg, what's the average GPA of students who use student services more than twice in any given quarter? And the average GPA was 3.71. So we were brilliant at helping B+ students become A- students, right? All those students, by the way, were already going to complete. Not without some worth or valor, right? We also had a small group of students who were my 0.0 students who we forced to come see us. But it was too late by that point. Like, they were already gone too. But we missed that entire group in the middle. And the reason I'm coming to this is that the psyche of that, I'm a social psychologist, the psyche of that group in the middle, there are many paradigms in their head, but I think one dominant one we know from the research is, I'm not sure I'm college material. I'm not sure college is for me. So now, Deb? Now, Deb tells us the first thing we do to a student who's already worried if they're college material when they come to us is test them in the 2 subjects they were most likely to hate in high school and have no success in, and tell them, hey, congratulations, you were right about one thing, you're not college material. Beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt, we also feel you're not college material, right? We didn't use exactly those words, although pretty much might as well have, right? If we were really honest with them, we would tell, oh, and by the way, 4 or 5 of you are never getting out of where we sent you. That would have been a bad idea from a marketing standpoint. I'm glad we didn't do that. So their psyche's already damaged by the onboarding process around. Now, this is not to say, A, math and English aren't important, or that the math and English people were doing this to students. This is just the way we did things. We started doing this with placement tests, what, in the 50s and 60s? I do think it's interesting to trace the history of the placement test, by the way. Where does that go back to? Where did ETS start doing this? It wasn't E then, it was just TS. The ASVAB, the military test. Like, these placement tests are sorting mechanisms, right? They're not designed for the purpose we had been using them for. And I do think it's interesting that one of those tests, when they went away, sent out this great memo saying, Wayne, we've been serving you well for a long number of years, but now our services are no longer needed because we have different ways of thinking about how to move students through math and English. By the way, caused by some of you in the room working on things like quant and Statway. So the student comes in, though, right? They come in, you already tell them you're not college material, very energizing message. And then the next thing that happens is they see an advisor. Any advisors in the room? All right, you're going to be the advisor today. How long do you get to meet with a new, where are you, sir? What college?
Central Community College platform.
All right, so if you're lucky, how long do you get with a new student before the first semester?
First of all, there's pressure to do them quickly.
Right, well, of course there is, right?
Get out of the room so we can get back home and get 20 minutes.
Exactly. That's the median answer to this question is 20 minutes. So in those 20 minutes, John is supposed to somehow, I love this. All right, John, I want you to meet with a student, learn their hopes and dreams, talk about what they're good at, what their challenges are, what they might want to do with their life, what are their interests, how do their interests match with careers, what careers might interest them, what programs we have at the college, and by the way, we haven't done that. I don't know why we expect the students to do that, match our own programs to careers. And then say, all right, well, given all that, here's how we're going to advise you. It's physically impossible. It's not a nearly impossible task. So what we did historically, when we were dealt with this task, and I mean, I don't know what else we expected to have happen, is we said, all right, well, you're a new student, you don't know exactly what you want to do. What do we say? Let's take some gen eds, right? We give them this, right? So my friend Davis Jenkins was able to garner from CCRC this is an actual Texas college, not your colleges, is we hand the students this and go, all right, go for it. Everyone's like, you sure this isn't ours? Is it ours? Right, and we say, all right, by the way, I'm a social psychologist. Behavioral economists and social psychologists get to argue about lots of dorky things, but we do agree about one thing. Roughly how many things that humans can make rational decisions between without getting paralyzed, right? Somewhere between 3 and 7, depending on the study and who you listen to. There are literally billions of combinations on this page. And, by the way, it's provided in language that we don't even understand. How long have you guys been working in higher education? Long time? What is HPR? Human performance. I think I got that. All right, cool. JOR, is that journalism spelled poorly? I think so. And what does all this mean? Like, this is all completely incomprehensible to us who work in higher education, much less a first-time in college student or a student who we just told has bad math and English skills, right? I mean, this is not a choice architecture. This is not designed to help someone make a choice. It's a legal document, as is everything else in your catalog that you hand them. It was never designed to help someone make a choice, right? So, all right, so we have these bewildered students. They're lost, they're confused. All right, so let's do this. Let me ask, this is where we get to start. All right, it's time. What's the game? Family Feud. We're going to play the feud. All right, here's how we're going to do this. I told you we're going to have some fun. We're going to do round 1. Now, you're an advisor, so you can provide. We're all going to answer the question, though. What do new students ask advisors? Okay, hold on. Show the question. What questions do new community college students ask advisors? All right, go. And I'm looking at this because I never remember the order that they're in. What do we ask advisors? What do new students ask advisors? What did you ask an advisor? What classes should I take? Number 2. All right, what else? See, I like that one, but no. By the way, if someone gets everything right, like you get the first 5 right, no matter what they say on number 6, I buzz them because it's fun. It's like part of the game. I like that one. What's the easiest? Although I don't think they ask advisors that as much as they ask their peers. What should I take first? What should I take first? I like it too, but I'm going to go like this. It's close. I like that. There's a version here, I think, that we can move towards. What was that? Do I have to come 5 days a week? You guys are killing me here. Yes. What's required? Say more. What's required how?
Do I need this to graduate?
Graduate for what? What major? Career options are a major. Like what? I mean, we got to start somewhere, right? Like, what do we do? What am I doing here at the college? Aside from taking some classes, which we said earlier. What are some other ones? How many credits do I take? What? Yeah. So the how long will it take version, like how long will it take? There you have to say, well, how many credits can you take? Right? The how long will it take? What else? How much will it cost? There you go. Oh, sorry, we didn't share those. There you go. All right, a couple more. Aha! That is one very few people get, by the way. That is a really good one. By the way, they don't all ask that, but that's a pretty important question. One more, by the way, for the sake of time. How much financial aid can I get? Okay, let's pause here for a second. There's another round. Don't worry, it's not over yet. All right. So I, by the way, think, do anyone think these aren't fair questions for students to ask? They seem pretty fair to me. So if I was to go to your college and pick a student in their 3rd semester, and I'm just going to take them out of a Psych 1. I pick on Psych 1 because I taught it. I'm going to take them out of a Psych 1 course. They're all in their 3rd semester. They're in their 8th week of their 3rd semester. And I buy them lunch. I'm going to do a focus group. And one of the things, I show them this. I don't show them it as a slide. Maybe I do. I say, hey, we think these are really fair questions for a student to know the answer to. Do you feel like you had good answers to these questions when you started? How many of your students are going to say yes to that out of 10? 2? Yeah? And how many of them feel like now, 3 semesters in, they have good answers to these questions? By the way, it tends to get worse, not better. This is a problem. It tends to get worse, not better. So they don't have, and this is not because advisors aren't giving it to them, right? He had 20 minutes up front. Is advising required at your college after that? Faculty advisor. So, by the way, I don't have any problem with the type of advising model. We're going to put Ryan on the spot later for that. I mean, what we've learned, I think, that Ryan can share is that the actors in the model are important. What's more important is who's doing what when to solve which problem. And we've seen faculty do that, student services, advisors, there's a whole range of options there. I don't remember who said this. One of my friends said, we'll say it was Chris Baldwin, that advising is not a person, it's a function. Right? Advising is something that advisors have the function in their job of advising, but faculty advise, right? Transfer people advise. One of my favorite advisors on your campus is someone I guarantee you have not trained, which is your administrative assistant who sits in the front of each department, who may be the key advisor on campus at some point for many students because they get asked all the questions. But pause for a second. If you don't think these are important questions, ask yourself this question. What type of higher education what type of higher educational institution are you losing students to left and right? Proprietary schools. Why are you losing them to proprietary schools? So usually somewhere in this early answer, someone yells because they market and they're advertised. Then I press and say, what are they advertising? It is literally these 6 things. It is exactly what for-profit schools advertise. And they are stealing your students with what? A value proposition. It's certainly not with outcomes data, right? What did Davis find when he looked at it? It's like 18%. Like Phoenix and National have about an 18% graduation rate. Now, I have a moral and ethical problem with that. By the way, very smart and good people work in those institutions and may teach, but the point is they are promising something that they don't often deliver on, and I think we'll talk about in a second why they don't deliver on it. But I'm actually more interested in how they steal your students. It's because they have clear answers to these questions. They always start with careers. By the way, number 2, you can't go to National or Phoenix and take Psych 1. Unless Psych 1's part of your program and you're taking it when they told to in the order 4th, right? They've done that part well. How long will it take? This is where they start falling into some problems, in my opinion. You can do this as fast as you want, right? Which is where the advertising's awesome, because it's 11:30 at night, and usually it's a woman, and often a minority woman. They're showing her, she's very excited. She's starting her academic, it's 11:30, I'm starting my full-time appointment. Of course, they've left out the first 16 hours of her day, when she got up at 6:30 and she got the kids to school, she went to work for 8 hours. She has a partner or not, it doesn't help her any, it doesn't matter. She comes home, does dinner, homework, get the kids to bed, and now apparently she's supposed to start online education full time, which I do think is a large reason we see lower completion rates. But again, moral ethical thing over here on that. But what's fascinating is how attractive this is to it is your students, right? In those transfer studies, always one of the top 3 or 4 transfer destinations for any given community college is, if you let it be, is National or Phoenix. And I will argue those aren't transfers. Those are dropouts from your school and they're going to another 2-year college. So the value proposition to your students, we're not delivering on, Nina.
I just feel like they're beating us at the marketing game, not at the value game.
Well, so I don't disagree with that. They're beating us at the marketing game, but we should learn from what they're marketing. Because we actually, and I actually have the presidents in the room love my new suggested marketing slogan, fail with us, it's cheaper. Okay, maybe not use that. That's probably not a bad idea. Strike the camera, it's not good. Anne's like, I am never saying that in public again. Yeah, point being, we cost 10 times, we're 10 times less expensive, and we have the same or better outcomes. So we do have a marketing problem, but I would argue it's more fundamentally a value proposition problem, that we don't spend the time and energy to get our students to understand what our value proposition is. And by the way, transfer with junior standing in a major is a value proposition. It doesn't have to be only that we will make you a welder in 9 weeks, or we will help you in the nursing program. We will help you transfer to SUNY Stony Brook in 2 years, and you will be a junior with academic standing in a program, and you can finish in 2 years. That's a value proposition. Which, by the way, one the for-profits absolutely do not have, right? They don't have the kind of stackable. So I do think these are important in as much as it makes the point we need to make our value proposition more clear. And also, going back to why we had so many part-time students earlier, it also gives them a purpose, giving them a reason to be here. Okay, so the second feud now, to get the music back, we're coming back, is I now want to talk about 2 groups of students I think you guys all have on your campuses. In fact, I'm fairly sure of it, who are highly successful in community colleges already, before we did anything. Who are those students? First, cohort-based CTE students. Not just nursing. I love you nursing folks. Nursing's a bad example because it's a selectivity. Anyone, when you say, hey, nursing's got a 90% success rate, can automatically say, well, you just took all the good students. And although that's true, many other things about nursing programs are relevant. But let's talk about cohort-based CTE programs. Anyone run those programs at your college in the room? Okay, over here. So anyone besides Monroe? I'm tired of talking to you guys, Hannah. Yeah, what's your position over those programs? Associate Dean. So what is the average completion rate in those cohort-based CTE programs at your college? Roughly. Not nursing, other ones. 60 is fine. Like if you take nursing out, I think you're going to be fine between 60 and 80 at most colleges. It depends. You also have some large programs which are semi-cohort, like ECE, which drag the numbers down. You have some programs like automotive, which are seemingly cohort, but people go out and come back into. So numbers are a trick, but call it 60. Or call it 65 or 70. Well, those are pretty good numbers, right? Because what's our average? If our overall success rate is in the 30s, and the cohort-based CT students are in the 70s, what does it mean our pre-transfer, classic pre-transfer gen ed students are? Probably in the 20s. All right, so there's one group of students who are highly successful. Now, there's a second group of students who are on the pre-transfer. There's no overlap between these two groups of students. These are students who come in, they're largely 18 to 21 years old. They are 100% dedicated to transferring somewhere and going on to a four-year institution, and they are also highly successful. 70, 75% transfer, 80, 85% transfer rates. Who is this group? It's an interesting group. It's not dual enrollment, although that does have some good numbers. Not international students. Over 30, no, over 30 is fascinating, by the way. I don't have time to go into that, but over 30 re-entry students who are going back for a career program, yes. Over 30 moving into your classic gen ed transfer, quite the opposite. They're actually, on average, struggle more than your recent high school graduates. It's athletes. Community college athletes. Hold on a sec. We're not talking about certain four-year Division I football, basketball programs where you have a big problem. Do you guys all have athletics or just some of you? All have athletics. Anyone looked at those data? Transfer rates of your athletes? It's, at most colleges, 70, 75, 80%, right? So interesting. So these are, by the way, all pre-transfer students. So now here's the second question for the feud. Well, I already lost it. All right, show the question. Why are community college athletes and cohort-based CTE students so successful? Go. Structure. Okay, now this is where I have to look at my phone. I think that's number 2. I put that under clear course paths. They both have clear course paths. What does that mean? It means if you're in a cohort seat, no Surge Tech students ever wondered what they're taking in their third semester. And athletes get specific advising and counseling from an athletic advisor or athletic counselor every semester that says, take these courses, right? Could not be more different types of students. They're both doing it. They both have very clear course paths. What else? Relationships. So say more, Aaron, because I want to give you one here. But what? Relationships with whom?
Well, there are a lot of people. So they have their success coach, keeping them on track.
All right.
They have their coaches.
Okay, stop. We're going to get you a bunch. You're getting credit for a bunch. I had to stop before you got too many. All right, they have mandatory support. What does that mean? If you run into a problem, so anyone in your programs that you're associate dean for, what I usually will ask is, hey, does anyone ever fall through the cracks of those programs without the faculty chair or department chair knowing about it first? The answer is no. The faculty knows what the students are in trouble before the students do. With athletes, the coaches know before the students do, which are, by the way, these two features that are highly important. One is if you have trouble, your coach or your chair gets it for you, gets support for you. You're on the football team and you're in tutoring hall, you're not playing, right? You're going. On the mandatory sports side, if you're a nurse and you're having problems writing, they get you someone from the English Writing Center to work with you, or math for another area. So these, in both of these cases, these again could not be more different. Like your average person running the automotive tech program, the women's volleyball coach are not usually the same person. They're very different people in the student's life, but both of them, by the way, and I think this is the important part, they are institutional agents who are invested in that student's success. They are someone at the college whose job it is to hold high standards, but also to make sure the students get the support they need. So 3 and 4, I think, Aaron, go very much together. What else? Eligibility. So you know what I say on this is I put this under discipline and accountability. Eligibility is you know exactly what you do to need to play, And on the CTE, cohort-based CTE side, you know exactly what you're going to have to do when you get this job, right? And so you know exactly what you're accountable for. Licensure exams will cause you to do that too. Yeah?
There's invested communication between the schools he's going to transfer to.
Say that again?
Invested communication between the coach of the current student and one that's going to transfer to.
Okay, so you're talking about the moving between schools. I like that one, but I'm going to buzz it. Not enough people are as smart as you to have said that. That's a good one. I like that a lot. What?
They have a clear goal, and they know exactly what they want to do.
This is a big one, right? Because these are both highly motivated students. What's interesting to me is they are highly motivated by something that is completely different, right? If you're an athlete, you're motivated by wanting to transfer and play your junior and senior years, right? If you're in the cohort-based CTE program, you're moving into that job. You want to get that job, keep it, and move up in that field. You're highly motivated in both of those cases. What's interesting, and we would have to test this with social science data, it may not be the nature of the motivation that's important. It's how highly motivated these students actually are. That's a fascinating one to me. What are some others? Peers. Peer support, which, by the way, goes with my joke one, number 8, which is uniforms. These students travel together. They are part of the same team. They are part of the same program. Whether it's the women's volleyball team, the baseball team, or the blue smocks versus the pink smocks, and that was not gender neutral. The green and maroon socks, the different programs where they are a group. They are a team. They have peers. My joke on this for the football team is if you're the starting quarterback of the football team, 98 of the other 99 people want you to succeed academically. The other guy's the backup quarterback. Perfectly happy for you to fail. But you've got this motivation built in. The final one, so I can move on, kind of where you were going also, Michael, a ticking time clock. If you're an athlete, you got 5 years to play 4. This is fascinating, by the way. What's the average time to degree at your college? Anyone below 4 years? Measure it for your athletes. All of a sudden, it's 2 to 2.5. By the way, are athletes on average from higher income strata in this country, community college athletes? No. Are they, quote unquote, more or less prepared on those placement tests we give? It's the same or less. So this is, now we get back to it again, the more challenging group, the athletes, apparently that's not, the issue is not how challenging they are, it's what we do for them. We create structures and systems and processes and cultures around them, and they succeed at very high rates. The same is true of the cohort-based CT students. If you really want to scare yourself sometime, I know that's what you came here for, run your numbers without the athletes and cohort-based CTE students in it on what percentage of your students complete. Starts getting depressing pretty quickly. You may have TRIO or other programs where what the point is where we see the big ideas of guided pathways. And this is a graphic we've come to on the national project, where we clarify the paths. We give students a clear path to know what they need to take in what order to get to where they want to go. Now, to do that, by the way, you need to help them figure out where they want to go, and that's both a job mindset or a transfer mindset. So we have to help students get on a path differently, right? Davis says they need to have the end in mind when they are starting to think about their education. We need to have their end in mind, right? When we think about, well, okay, so what are you here to do? Going back to where I started. If I'm going to a bar, hopefully if I'm going to a bar in Atlanta and I see a bunch of Georgia State students, they know exactly why they're there and what they're doing. By the way, here's a New York story on this. I know it's CUNY, but LaGuardia in CUNY. My vice president, Priya, lives in New York City now, and she was taking an Italian course at LaGuardia for personal enrichment, and she was in there with 14 other students. It's a 15-student class, and now LaGuardia has a language requirement. Is that a CUNY thing, or is that just a LaGuardia thing? LaGuardia has a language requirement as part of their graduation, but because so many of their students are Latino or Hispanic or from Latin-speaking countries, they tell them take Italian because it's close, both Romance languages. So the other 14 students in her class, when the faculty member started the class, she asked everyone around there, say, hey, what's your major? What's your path? How far are you along in it? Aside from my VP, Priya, who works on guided pathways reform, the other 14 students all knew the answer to that question. They all knew exactly why they were there. They knew what they were doing. They knew why they were taking it, right? So this notion of having this be a mindset we can change students to is possible. Helping students stay on the path, the idea that we're going to keep students on the path with things like intrusive advising, and Ryan and the folks at ATD working on IPASS, with the folks from CCRC working on that. And finally, we need to ensure that they're learning what we say they're learning. This, by the way, graphic is something we came up with on the National Pathways Project, of which Monroe is a participant. This is a fairly landmark event that 8 national partners, now 10, could come to agreement about what to put on a one-pager about guided pathways. So what you see here are the big ideas on the right. You see some conditions on the left for planning, and I think a couple that are really important here. It takes leadership throughout the institution. You need presidents involved, you need faculty leadership involved. This isn't going to work, right? You need to be working together towards these solutions. The other big piece here is this is a long-term change. That Georgia State story is a 10-year story of improvement in higher education. Now, there's a lot of supporting documentation behind this. CCRC has developed a scale of adoption tool, which I know we're going to be talking to the New York Student Success Center about getting in front of you, which takes these 4 big ideas and kind of gets them down to the next level, helps you look at where at your college you're already doing some things that are relevant to this. I think one of the things about this I think is really important. This is not 180 degrees in another direction from where many of your thoughts were going already, hopefully, at your college, and many of the good things you've done can be brought in under this umbrella. And I want to give, using some more slides from my friends at CCRC, here's the kind of big ideas underneath each of these big ideas. And I'm going to stop. We can ask questions and talk for the rest of the time. We used to have a big discussion about we either had career programs or academic transfer programs. Now, we're talking a lot more about this notion of career communities or meta majors or academic communities. What's the idea here? Well, you have how many programs at your college? I don't know, 150, 180? That's a lot to decide between. Maybe a new student who's slightly undecided would be better off from being in one of 6 to 8 interest areas or meta majors or career focus areas. It's a lot easier to decide, I think I want to do something in business versus natural science than it is I want to do either actuary or surgical technology, right? Why not architect their initial choice rather than saying, hey, we got 180 programs. Why not create experiences in 6 or 7 or 8 big areas so they can explore things in that first semester that help narrow down their choice? A la carte courses, distribution requirements, and electives to program maps with course sequences, critical courses, and co-curricular requirements. One quick note on this. There's also this myth, by the way, that students like wandering. They love free choice. They like wandering throughout your curriculum. They don't. You talk to them. We've done, CCRC has done research, Public Agenda, RP Group in California. We've done all this research. What tends to come back, yeah, you have different segments of students. The one who likes wandering is small. There's a big majority that says, hey, you know what's interesting? I'd like you to help me figure out where I want to go, and then tell me what I need to take to get there. That's the dominant response. By the way, especially from low-income students, because they're the ones who don't have time to wander around, right? So this notion of providing students clarity is really important. Algebra is the default math path to program-specific field math paths. I mean, Statway, Quantway is great, by the way. But you need to know if a student's going into a STEM field or not before they're in the quant sequence versus the STEM sequence. That Tennessee story about the great dev ed reform in Tennessee with the co-rec model where they're getting 60% of the students through in one semester, you can't do that without knowing what the pathway is for those students. Although I would say defaulting out of STEM is probably better than defaulting into it, because only about 20% of people go into STEM, 80% go into other fields. But we're learning that as well. Certificates and degrees, moving to degree pathways with certificates along the way, this notion that we're trying to develop careers. I'm going to stop here for a second and open it up. What are some thoughts or concerns or questions about these big ideas under the kind of mapping of programs? I'm looking at this to see 236, perfect. What are some observations? What are some questions? What are some things you've done? By the way, I see some cameras. I think we're giving you these slides. I'm giving them, by the way, that's always fun when I do that right near the end. Hey, dude, that would have been cool an hour ago. Thanks for nothing. People are taking notes are like, God damn it. Just a stupid guy in a Hawaiian shirt. All right, thoughts, questions? Yes, John.
I've been advising undeclared majors for about 14 years. When I first started, I wanted to try to understand what every topic was and what every topic.
Right.
And it took an hour literally to advise them because they didn't even know what a social science was.
Right. Why would they?
And for me to have a tool that is a little bit more specific about choices within these categories, I think it makes their choices easier in my job.
Yeah, and by the way, I love that, John, and before you think that what we're doing here is trying to account for the fact that we don't have enough advisors, I mean, we argue that under a guided pathways model where you're taking ownership over monitoring progress, you actually need, if not the same, more advising, not less. What we might do, though, as John's saying, is we're getting some things that help us make students make initial choices with some clarity, help them see the initial path, and then react to their behavior along the path in more of an ownership model. I mean, this is more of the IPASS approach with JFF and CCRC and ATD. But yeah, this is a big deal. We want everyone to be able to see the path a little more clearly. I mean, it's not like advisors, by the way, have any, I mean, it's been your job for 14 years, but navigating students wandering through this is a hard enough task for advisors to take. I mean, How many of you have degree audit programs? Think about that for a second. What that means is no human being can look at a transcript and figure out what the hell a student's doing. You need a computer program to do it. It's modeling chaos, right? You're modeling chaos, and until you have a computer program, I mean, no, if you think it's not true, try pulling some transcripts of students who've been at your college for 2 years. You try to figure out what the hell they're doing. We did this, by the way, with some faculty. My other observation, here's a story from Miami-Dade, the first year of CBD. When their faculty were really rested, do we really need this structure? Do we really need to tell students what to take in what order? Shouldn't they be able to figure that out themselves? We did, by the way, another code. Whenever you say we figured it out, they should be able to. Bad sign. You guys, we already know you're the winners. You don't need to remind yourself of that. It's okay. It's good. It's all good. But we want to help the other students, the ones who aren't getting through. But Miami-Dade, they had 28 faculty. Remember, Miami-Dade's the biggest community college in the country, 100,000 students. They had 28 faculty from their 20. This is in year 1 of CBD, where Chris and Tom and CCRC and JFF and I and Public Agenda were like, we're building the ship as we're floating it, or whatever the analogy is. It was lunacy in year 1 of completion by design back in 2011. But Miami-Dade was struggling with, do we really need structure? And they had 28 faculty from their 28 largest departments going, do we really need this? So then I found out later, and by the way, unions don't do much in Florida, but this is one of their sort of unions they had. The faculty union president actually asked the biology faculty to leave the room. Then they asked the other 27 faculty to design the ideal 2-year pathway to graduate with an AS degree in biology and transfer with junior standing in a major to Florida International University, which is by far their dominant transfer partner, 70% of their transfers. And I picture like Game of Thrones, they closed the door, dungeon doors. For 3 hours, those 27 faculty only had the catalog, the schedule, and a computer. And their task was to design this ideal pathway for a student to graduate in 2 years in biology and transfer with junior standing in a major. And when they opened the door 3 hours later, the epiphany had happened at Miami-Dade College. Why? Because they couldn't do it. They could not do this thing we get preachy and condescending about our first time in college students not being able to do. They, 27 faculty member, Miami-Dade likes to tell people they have the most PhDs on their stat, whatever. It's fine. All good. All these people with PhDs, maybe that was the problem. That's a different coin. I have one, I'm making fun of myself. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do this thing that we get preachy and condescending about students not being able to do. And you might say they're faculty, they're not advisors. They work at the college, right? 27 faculty who work at the college couldn't do this thing we think is too easy, and then that should be fine. Students are all right. Right? That was their moment. And they've, in that original year of CBD, did a lot of work after that to make it better. Other thoughts about this, the kind of program maps idea. All of this is just introduction. We know this is not, we're not going deep into any of this. All kinds of resources out there for you to explore deeper. But onboarding, so the process of coming into the school. So we talk, this is my favorite. Where do you do your career services? Oh, we help the people who are about to leave get jobs. Well, that's kind of backwards. Maybe we should help people explore careers when they're trying to figure out what major they should have, right? Folding that career information up front, talking about this from the start, building it into first semester experiences. I mean, a lot of the 30 Pathways colleges are doing this. We have a semester schedule currently. Why not a full program plan? If you know someone's trying to transfer into accounting to John Jay, maybe that's one, made that up. You know what they have to take, or you should. And if you don't, they don't, right? The student's not going to figure that out. The idea of academic assessment versus holistic assessment talks about that entering rather than placement tests. Is there a way we can get folks into Quantway Statway earlier or co-rec? And by the way, maybe the non-cognitive stuff matters just as much, if not more, than the cognitive stuff. Pre-rec remediation to co-rec, algebra and English to critical program courses. These are some of the big ideas. Dual high school credit a la carte to exploration of pathways beginning in high school. This is a very different onboarding experience, right, than the one where students kind of drop in and we hope that John figures it out for them in 20 minutes, which, by the way, is not a good long-term plan. Ann, you want to talk a little bit about what you guys have built in for your onboarding in the last couple of years, because I think it's fairly notable on this feature.
Let me turn on for the people who actually want to know it.
Okay, well, I'll let you do that. Yeah, so when students come into Monroe now, like...
It used to be that I would say I would be an engineering student, and we would place them and tell them they can't be, and we would put them in liberal arts, and that engineering would be lost. And so we always capture that's their pathway, is that they do want to be an engineering student. And now all the processes are about them wanting to be an engineering student, not that they're in developmental and then they're in the next step of liberal arts.
Right.
And so we're talking to them about, so they get their 4-term sequence of an engineering or an extended sequence
Right.
of an engineering path, even though before we just said you're in developmental education, you have to take this math, this English,
Right.
and orientation course, and don't worry about.
We'll get to that later, right. How are you guys helping students come to that exploration? I mean, that student, for some reason, they wanted to be an engineer, but how do you get to that point?
And so let me back up even a little bit more. We started an open house, so when we even have open house for students who are thinking
Yeah.
about coming to MCC, it's all organized now by our schools now. And so at open house, and these are big schools, so it's arts and humanities, it's STEM, it's health and physical wellness. So it's not saying this is nursing, it's not saying this is English, it's not saying it's psychology, right? We're saying, in general, what's your big picture of stuff you like? And we actually have all of these color coded. And so even at open house days, students come in and then they meet students
Yep.
who are in those schools, we call them, and they start everything along that framework. So that when they come back on mid-student day, then we refresh that and we actually embed them and they go into these sort of pre-advised and tracks by schools that help them, again, it's that forced choice architecture. We can't pick it across our 110 programs, we can pick it across the schools. And so let's start with that and keep making the slices smaller and smaller. and
Yep.
smaller.
So you're architecting their choice process. And by the way, what you're describing is pretty much the experience of elite private institutions, right? Even turn down to the terminology of schools. That's not surprising, knowing you, Ann, that you would do that. I like that. Other observations on this idea of having, if you're going to change to a program mentality, you got to change onboarding. John's got more resources. He's got more ability to do this. But this notion of exploring careers has to happen somewhere. That's one way. We've heard a lot of the colleges on the Pathways Project build it into first semester courses that are required. Not just here's how you learn how to navigate college, but here's the process of exploring that happens in the first semester as well. Yeah, Michael. Third one, for prerequisite to co-req. Yeah. So what the best example of the prereq to co-req probably is the state of Tennessee, which in fall of 2015, all of their 2- and 4-year incoming students went directly into transfer level math and English. So I see this, by the way, as I see Statway, Quantway, and co-req as like different sides of the same coin. I call them one's extreme acceleration. The co-req one is you're going to go directly into the course, and we're going to put a required course around that. In Tennessee, it's either 1, 2, or 3 units based on where they would have placed. If they would have placed lower, it's a required 3-unit class around the target course that they have to take to be able to take the target course, right? So that's a co-req model. I don't think Quantway, Statway to me has always been the same idea, but just 2 courses in 2 semesters. Like, so you have the prep course and the target course. So I think, by the way, interestingly, both of them produce similar outcomes as far as we've seen so far. The other part of the Tennessee story, of course, on the math side, is to know which of the transfer level math you need to go into. You have to know what program you're in. Because even if you're in psychology, by the way, if you ask me what are the psych students, what math is right for a psych student, I'm going to tell you you need more information. Because if they're in social or behavioral or early childhood or any of the other kind of non-mathematical psychology areas, they could absolutely be in statistics or quantitative reasoning. If they're going into cognitive psych or neuropsych, now you need the math that's in the science sequence, right? So the point about what's the right math is also part of the co-req story, which is why it's kind of on the list as well. I don't know if anyone else does in the back table has a strong opinion on the co-req versus extreme acceleration. My gut is we're going to find out a lot more in the next. I guess on one level, if they tie, right? If at the end of the day, after 5 or 10 years of research, they tie, you could say either way is fine, or you could say why not do it in 1 semester? There's competing arguments for both. If you do it in 1 semester, you've got 6 or 7 units on someone's transcript held by those courses. Where if you do it in 2 semesters, you can put more things around it. You could actually make that as an argument either way. No, it does not. The co-req is not a degree applicable course, although it's required at those places. They had to get dispensation because Tennessee is also one of those states who was shrinking the number of units of the degree. So they had to say, can we do this? Can we require this course? And because of the success data, they were able to make the case for it. So, all right, I'm hitting my 2:45 thing, so here's what I'm going to do. Stuff is happening in advising. Ryan, I want you to, just real quickly, talk about the work of, I know you'd love to do this in 2 minutes, but we talk about info dumps, advising versus teaching, full-time, part-time, and scheduling, going to just-in-time support. That's my favorite. That's why I think IPASS does the best job, Ryan, among many, is this notion of how this hits at various points on the continuum. You want to say a little bit about this?
Look, I don't think I can probably do it justice, but except to say that you want to orient your advising around the time points when you want students to find out what they need to find out.
Yeah.
So in the same way that, I don't know, to use a kind of terrible analogy, probably like Amazon knows what you bought and it tells you what you might want to check out next. Can we get anywhere near that? And that's a really rough way of thinking about it if you have no experience with this, but just a sense of, like, let's not dump everything up front. Like,
Right.
so the catalog makes no sense. Let's also not make it so rigid and that you're sort of just barely giving the person, kind of anything to go off.
Right.
There's a balancing act there.
Yeah, and I think that what I usually, I'm glad you said that, because I actually, by the way, love that analogy of the Amazon, because I'm a former data science guy. Like, we have so much information about our students after they've been here for a little while that we don't use. Like, how do we then build it into advising or use systems, technology to help us do that? I mean, during completion by design, we had colleges who redesigned their advising model to be all faculty or faculty-centric, and ones that redesigned it from faculty-centric to student services-centric. And they were each effective in their own way. Why? Because they did exactly what Ryan said. They asked the question, what information does a student need at what point in their trajectory? Who's going to give it to them? How do we know they're getting it? And how are those people trained? And that's what I think is the power of the model he doesn't have time to talk about today, is that they're going through that process of saying who needs what when, how do we know, who's providing it, and how do we train them? Right? That's a deep advising model. I don't want to give this short shrift, but I want to get to the end here so I can add final questions. And teaching and learning, this is something, by the way, I got to tell you that the teaching and learning stuff, we kind of screwed this up early on. We didn't focus on this enough. We talked about the first three big ideas. Like, we need structure, we need students to get into those pathways, and we need to make sure we monitor progress. And we kind of assumed this was happening all along. When we moved into the ACC pathway models, we elevated this to its own pillar, because we really got to focus on this notion of learning outcomes and what they mean at a program and institutional level. And if we care about liberal arts, and if we care about these general education outcomes, we actually have to think about how they're being developed. Like, we all say critical thinking. Critical thinking, I guarantee you, on one of your gen ed or institutional learning outcomes at your college. But if I was to ask everyone in this room to write down their operational definition of critical thinking, we'd have 50 different answers. And then where does it happen at your college? Well, it kind of happens over there or over here. Like, one of the nice things about Pathways is we actually get to set, and when we think about a program plan, we put together the program for what a graduate in psychology is going to do, we can think about how courses fit together for the first time ever. Right now, you are certifying, going back to that crazy map at the start, that every combination of GE courses a student could put together results in the same outcomes, which is complete insanity, right? It's not backwards designed from anything. It's not designed at all. So one of the idea of Pathways, I think it's really exciting, especially if you're in the humanities and social sciences, is we can work on these outcomes you hold so dear by thinking about where in our courses they're occurring and how these courses fit together. I mean, we've heard this from some of the colleges at Lansing and Community College of Philadelphia and Western Wyoming, who at the same time they did guided pathways reform also looked at redefining their gen ed or institutional learning or our liberal arts education outcomes. Yeah, Ann.
Just two things I've noticed. One is we're able to use the schools model to market certain
Yeah,
programs
that's great.
to students. So when we started the sort of track program, we could market it directly to students who are sort of in a holding pen for nursing and fill the class with no problem, even though, sidebar opinion, we got good very stable. So the other thing that we were having, is also to align our co-curricular activities by school. So we can target co-curricular activities to specific cohorts, including what we call day in the life, and we
Yeah.
bring in folks in their first couple years of employment in some of these career pathways to meet with students in that school to help them get an idea. So you don't bring in a CEO, you bring in somebody who's like an entry-level accountant. You don't bring in the chief of police, you bring in somebody who's at the top, and help people understand what is this going to look like when I graduate, not 20 years later in my career.
Yeah, really important idea. So look, we've just scratched the surface today. There's so much under all this, and this was intended to get you thinking, as I said earlier, ask more questions. But so if you want to know where to learn more, I think certainly we'll send you this PowerPoint. But I think the best place to learn about the progression of what's happened in the last couple of years is to read CCRC's report on what they learned in the first year from the 30 Pathways colleges. And that's, have you got that somewhere on your site that you could give out? We can share.
There's actually the executive
Yeah, there's an executive summary that's about 10 or 12 pages, and then there's the paper, which is about 65 pages. I think there's a lot of resources on CCRC's website about what is Guided Pathways, on the AACC website, but what we learned in the first year from the National Project one has a lot of examples from what colleges did, peppered with the kind of introspection of CCRC, having been kind of evaluating that progress over the first year. So when I finish this, as you can tell, I'm excited about this, not because I get to travel around the country talking about it, because I want there to be as many Georgia State stories in 10 years as possible. And I think the more you can make, what does change take, whatever change model you use, you got to recognize there's a problem, you got to believe there's a solution that's related to the problem, and you've got to believe that it's worth the time and effort to go through this. The one thing I would leave you is go back to that slide from Georgia State and do it in your head. How many students were talking about at your college? Make it a 10-point increase. Make it a 15-point increase in your completion rate for your entering student class. Those are the numbers and lives you have the ability to affect here. It's not easy. It's not simple. There's a lot to work on. There's a lot of angles. I wrote a paper called Guided Pathways Demystified that explores the first 10 questions we hear the most from practitioners about guided pathways. That's available on my and other websites for free. I'm writing a second one because we got so many questions in the last 2 years. They have that. Well, that's good. I mean, that's really important that you already have that. That's good. I will stick around if you want. I want to be really respectful of the 2:53 on a Friday thing. If you have questions that come up after today, these people can find me. And as I mentioned, I'm sitting in a lot of bars hanging out, so I can answer your questions. I think there's a theme to this presentation, and I want to thank you guys very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you.